Hi everyone. This month marks the 10-year anniversary of the September 11th attacks. We have two Wichita firefighters here with us today. We have Lieutenant Jim Gaston, who's also with the Fire Department's Honor Guard, and also Lieutenant Chip Froome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Now, you guys first went out to New York City to offer support. Tell me, how did that come about, and when did you actually get out there?
At the time after it happened, I think a lot of guys had the urge inside of them to want to go help. You know, if it's kind of a thing where firefighters have that niche that they want to go and help people. And that's kind of why we get in this field. I started making phone calls at that time, and when I did, I started, having a lot of no answers. I couldn't find anything. I got a hold of a 911 dispatcher in New York, which gave me a couple numbers to get a hold of people. And through the grapevine, I spent hours and hours on the phones to get everything lined out, and was able to set up a deal where we could go down and help out like the first or second day after all this had happened. So it was like on the 13th or 14th. And then after, like on the 15th, because at that time I'd been talking to about 60 or 70 guys and females. Of course we have females in the fire department also, so they were involved and wanting to go down and help out also. During that time, FEMA came out and said that they didn't need any more people at this time because they had so many volunteers that it was just, the influx was too much. They just, they couldn't handle all the people coming in to help. It was hard enough keeping track of who was there and who wasn't there. So at that time, they it changed my mentality of what I was wanting to do, but I still wanted to go and lend moral support. So I called back to the guys and asked, hey, this is the deal now. We're not going to be able to go and help on the pile, but I still want to go. I feel like I need to. I just have a feeling inside me that wants to be there and want to help out as much as I can, even lending moral support. So I got a hold of a lot of the guys that were interested before. Some of them had backed out. Some of them felt that, if I can't go down, like rescue members that were really wanting to go down and use their talents to help out on the pile. On that note, we ended up getting about 10 or 11 guys that were really, really solid, interested in going. And then I opened it up to the county also, and got a couple of the county firefighters that were interested in going. And also Andover Fire, we got the fire chief of Andover, Danny Armstrong, also was interested in going. So it was a big amount of people for us, that was wanting to go down there. So after making all the phone calls, we had a lot of local people that wanted to help out too. So to make a long story short here, they had groups that wanted to help us get to Kansas City because there was no planes flying out of Wichita yet. So we were able to get a bus line to go from Wichita to Kansas City. And then from Kansas City, we had Vanguard gave us round trip, $100 round trip per person, just to pay for the fuel basically, to get from nonstop, one way from Wichita, from Kansas City to Vanguard. Vanguard flew us down to LaGuardia Airport, and then from there we had vans take us there down to Central Park, where we stayed at the YMCA there. We went on the 17th, 18th, and 19th, I believe it was. It was 3 days, and it was about 7 or 8 days after the towers. And when we flew in, it was I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself here, but the one thing that really stands out though is we flew in, they banked us around the pile as the plane flew in, and we could see the pile, and it looked like a football game was going on. It was lit up so bright, and you could still see all the debris and all the smoke coming up off the pile, and it was just very, very eerie, knowing that we're in a plane, and we just took the same route that this plane probably took, and that was pretty eerie.
I bet that was a striking sight.
Yeah, it really was.
So Chip, when you got there and you guys landed, then what did you do first?
Well, we get there, and Jim had it all organized, and we got to the YMCA actually, and this lady come running out, Jim Gaston, and they got us checked in. Within a few minutes, we walked down just a couple blocks there in Manhattan, near Central Park and the Trump Towers, and the first station we went to was Station 40. And we talked to the guys there on shift, and at the time, Captain Randy Liker, he's now retired, went down, was kind of like our spokesperson. We talked to him, and they said, we just got back from working at the pile, at the site, and we're very exhausted, and we understood. And he said, come back in the morning, And we did. We went back to the hotel. We slept a couple hours. We had breakfast. We kind of waited around. So they had their shift change. They had new guys there. We went down, and Jim had a T-shirt, some welcoming things for him. And they invited us in and said, come on in. I get a cup of coffee, and we're talking, and they're telling us these stories. And every guy, every firefighter there had a story, and we were just blown away with this. So we're standing in there, and across their intercom system, what we call our plectron system, they make an announcement, and they all got quiet. And all of a sudden we started listening, and they started announcing the confirmed firefighters that they had found at the pile. And that particular station lost the most out of all of them. They lost 12 firefighters from that station, and we felt like maybe we were invading their space, but they still, made us feel that we were welcome. They understood that we were there to support them. And well, one of the stories there at Station 40 that really stands out after talking with all the different firefighters on shift there that morning, and every one of them had a different story, but the one that really sticks out and just was overwhelming was this big burly firefighter, this guy from the Bronx, New York, and he was telling us how horrible he had felt because it was his shift, and those were his guys that were missing, the 12. That was his crew, and he had been planning this golf outing all summer long at this big golf tournament, and one of the guys on that crew that was missing was working a shift exchange for him, and he was really upset. And this guy, one of these that was working for him, had 8 children, and he goes, and there's this truck right there with this gear in it right there, and we're looking at this truck, and happening at 8:30, right prior to 9 o'clock in the morning, that's when their shift change is. So you had, instead of maybe 4 people on one engine there, they had 6, 7, some cases 8 firefighters on one truck, because both shifts went down there. And just listening to him and telling the stories, and later on reading the book about that particular firehouse, it talked about him being there, and he spent the next 7 days there at that station answering the phone calls for that firefighter's little girl that was calling up, have you found him yet? Have they found him? And different family members from not just, New York, all over the United States, from cousins and different people calling, and he just felt obligated and never went back home to, his family for 7 days. And he was just, that was really difficult, but he was very open and willing to share with us all those experiences, and they just poured out all these stories, and each firefighter that we met had a different story of things, and very overwhelming.
In the perspective, where all the stations are located, if you understand that our stations are located out in a broad area, and our answering district's a pretty wide area, but in New York, you walk 4 or 5 blocks and you're at another fire station. Walk 4 or 5 more blocks and you're at another fire station, because instead of covering blocks, they cover buildings, because like the Trade Center, is 110 stories, one building, and then 110 stories the next building. So you've got hundreds of thousands of people in a small area like we would have over across the whole city. So when these towers were hit, every station went out their front slab and looked out, and you could see the towers, from almost anywhere you could walk out, you could see them. And they're all like, this is the big deal. This is the big one. We're all going. So guys were jumping on trucks. They were jumping on the backs of pickups. They were jumping, wherever they could jump on, they were saying their intentions were, we're getting down there and we're going to do what we can to get out. And what a lot of people don't understand is when a building's hit like that or on fire, you don't use elevators. You got to walk stairs, and the people they were rescuing were up, 50, 60 stories up. If you can imagine walking 50 or more stories upstairs and then still having enough energy to rescue people and carry them down the stairs, these guys are monsters. They really are. I look up to these guys like almost to the point of gods. These guys are great guys, and they were all just breaking down and weeping and had these stories. And some of the wives were still there in the stations, waiting for their husbands to come back to the station, thinking that maybe they're still going to come home. And they'd be out there, they'd have shrines like candle vigils out in front of their stations, and the candles had been burning so long you could see trails of wax just going down the road. I mean, it was amazing. There was like hundreds and hundreds of candles that had already burnt down to the bottom where the wax had rolled down the road, and you'd see them, that wide and an inch deep of just candle wax going down the road. And then all the flowers, and these ladies were out there trimming up the flowers and setting them up in arrangements. And finally, I think Chip or one of the guys asked him what her deal was, if she was a florist or what, and she was one of the wives of the missing husband, and it was just
heartbreaking.
Came by every day.
And she still had a smile on her face.
Yes.
I think she was in shock, just complete shock, because she had a smile on her face. She was talking to us. She was very cheerful and
Very friendly.
And we felt like that, that's really going to hit them hard, And in a month from now, after this is all done and they finally got away from this pile, it's going to hit them like a sledgehammer, just hit them hard. And that's when they lost so many guys after that. So many guys had to go on and retire because of injuries, or go on and retire because mentally they couldn't handle it. Like this guy, after seeing 12 guys and a guy that basically should have been him, and there's a lot of guilt there. It'd be tough to go through that. It really would.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
Respiratory distress, just pulverized concrete. I think the biggest chunk of concrete was, the size of marbles in the glass. It is overwhelming.
Did the firefighters share any stories about what it was like to go into the buildings and rescue people? You talked about the physical difficulties, what a challenge that was, but any personal stories?
Some of them were talking about, I remember one in particular that really hit home to me, that, because later on I'd seen a story, I'd watched one of those stories that they were following the recruits around, There was a news crew that had been assigned to these two guys that were just brand new recruits. And that story, they talk about some of these things that we had already heard from guys that were there. One of them was talking about their engine had pulled up to the site, and his captain, being more experienced, told the guys, "Hey, don't get out yet." And they're thinking, "Why?" And they said, "Have you guys not seen? There's people jumping from these buildings. We don't want to get hit." And if you remember, the priest went up and was reading last rites to one of the firefighters that had been killed, and he got hit by a jumper and killed him. So these firemen had to wait and look up like for the rain, and see if anyone's coming out of the windows at the time they were getting out of their trucks. And once they got inside the buildings, they said it sounded, and one of the guys had said it sounded like just big old huge loud thuds going on outside. And in this show that I watched, I'm sure a lot of people have seen it. It was probably 3 or 4 months after the 9/11 they aired this show, and they have that where you can hear those noises of people hitting the ground from 40 and 50 stories up. It's just, that would be treacherous. Oh yeah, it would haunt you for life, and that's, of course, we didn't witness any of that stuff, and I'm just glad we didn't. I've got magazines and stuff that we were reading on the way, and they're at the towers when we were there, reading different magazines and showing these pictures that people had captured of people jumping and falling to their deaths. It's just, but when you think of the consequences, burn alive or come down with this building or jump, they didn't think they was going to live anyhow, and they chose their own way to die, I guess. Pretty sad.
So were you guys allowed to actually walk down to Ground Zero, get anywhere close to there?
Yes.
And some of us did, some of them didn't. The group that went, we found out real quick that first night we went down there, we had a group of about, I think it was 15 or 16 with the media that had walked down towards the pile, and it was like 3 a.m. in the morning, and we were met by a chain link fence with military personnel there with M16s out, and they're like, just because you got fire department t-shirts on don't mean you're passing. Because if you notice, if you have a fire or something, a lot of times firemen will have a t-shirt on. They can go right up to the fire and either help the guys, help them with their air packs getting off, or help with different things. This deal was, you gotta understand, it was a crime scene. There's 343 firemen that died. There's 23 police officers that died. There's all the guys from the Port Authority that had died. And then, they said a total of almost 3,000 people. So this is a huge crime scene. And they didn't want people going in and walking through debris that they may be picking the only part of the DNA up off the ground that they just walked over. So we knew that it wasn't going to be easy getting in, and we didn't want to impinge on something that we didn't need to be there anyhow. I think it was the last day we were getting ready to leave is when I was able to get down there. I was talking with one of the fire chiefs there and just telling him our interest, that we were from Wichita. We were there to just lend moral support, and he was at the station we were at. And he says, he says, I'll take you guys down there to the pile. And he goes, you guys just, get on we had a little gator. He got us on, and he said, we'll just drive you in. And when you guys get there, just get off and look and talk to some of the guys there. And then when you're ready to go, let me know, and I'll drive you guys back out so there won't be any hassles. And me and, at the time, my nephew was just an explorer. He was trying to get on the fire department. Now he's on. But at that time, him and I had got on and went down there and was able to get down to ground zero at that time and stand right there by Station 10, which is right across from the pile. And they had all the heavy machinery working on the pile, the large cranes and stuff. And at that time, there wasn't any personnel working on the pile. But I did notice one thing that was really hit home is they stopped what they were doing at one time. We were there, and during that time they had firefighters come from Station 10, had went over and got a spine board with like a bag that you would put a person that's deceased in, and they walked up on the pile and got into this area where they had found part of a coat and part of an air pack that they had loaded up in this bag and then zipped it back up and then carried it down like they had, one of their firefighters, because that's the only thing left that they had found. But it was so quiet, and everybody was just solemn, and when they were coming down with that, and they took it over and loaded it into one of their units that took it off to, I'm sure, to either a hospital or the morgue or whatever. But it's just sad to see stuff like that going on down there.
Mm-hmm. I can't imagine. Does it feel a lot different to be there in person versus what you see on TV? Because I remember covering tornadoes as a reporter. It's one thing to see the images on TV, but it's another thing to actually walk through the streets, like in Greensburg.
Huge difference. A lot of it, on TV, you can't smell the smells, you can't see the debris. A picture only captures so much of the view, and with your eyes, you move your head around a little bit and you can see so much. I mean, Chip can tell you also, the pile was still as tall as any of the buildings we have in Wichita. There's 13, 14 stories tall, the pile was when we got down there.
16 acres of twisted steel and rubble. And I remember going down to Oklahoma City and witnessing that when the Murrah building had been blown up, and looking at the surrounding buildings there and seeing some of the damage. But there's just no comparison. And the damage of the surrounding buildings, of course, the 7 towers, they took not just the two World Trade Centers, the 7 towers, all of massive 16 acres of this rubble, and the iron workers, it was incredible. Yes, the firefighters were working on the pile and everything and all the way around the perimeter, but the iron workers, it was unbelievable, the coordination of that plan and the effort that they had going and removing all that twisted steel. And smoke still coming up. One of the search dogs had been overcome by the fumes, and how they also had to stop work, and how they quickly passed that dog down that pile. So if you can imagine 27 stories up of twisted steel of a collapsed building, and how quickly they passed that dog down and got it to a veterinarian ambulance and shot that dog to the nearest veterinarian hospital. And that was, to me, that was so impressive. Mm-hmm. How the care and everything.
Oh, they treat them like humans. They're like one of their own anyhow. So,
what did the firefighters say to you out there on the pile?
Well, I had one. He goes, they were friendly, very friendly, and they were wanting to talk about things other than fire department at that time. And we didn't really initiate any conversation. This guy was, so where are you guys from? We told him Wichita, and he's a big baseball fan. He was very interested in the the Shockers. He knew about WSU, and, had won the College World Series a few years prior to that, and was talking to him about the NBC tournament, the National Baseball Congress Championship being played there locally, and all the different teams. And at the time we had the AA team here for the Royals, and you could tell they were just passing the time and wanting to talk about other things. I mean,
Get their mind off it.
Do you remember any stories? Anything they told you?
Yeah, I'd say this. When I was down there, the area I was in was right there by Station 10. And like Chip said, I didn't want to start any conversations with them because I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to step on anyone's feet and say, something, because they may have been the only one that lived out of their whole crew, and they're just there hoping to find one of their crew members, and didn't know what to really say. So I don't remember any real conversations that we had, because it was more of a just taking it all in, just standing there. And I think I stood there for an hour and a half to 2 hours just with my jaw dropped open, just going, oh my gosh, the devastation is just unbelievable. But a lot of people told us prior to going down there, oh, you guys don't know, you're going down there to New York. Those people are, New York people are rude. They're gonna, they're watch out for this. Don't ride on the subway. Don't do this. And it was all but that. We got down there and the reception was huge. The funniest part, though, I think, is when we got off the airport in LaGuardia. Do you remember? It was like a ghost town. Walking through LaGuardia Airport right now, I guarantee there's 100,000 people walking through there. When we were there, we were the only ones
flights to
there.
land once the air service had started back up.
It just started back up that day.
That we're walking through there, and that's exactly what I thought. This is a ghost town.
It's like, whoa, you're looking around and there's no one. I mean, not even in the little shops and stuff. There's nobody there working. It's just like we walked through and came around, and we didn't have any bag. We carried all of our bags, didn't we? And we didn't have much. We didn't have anything but carry-on stuff. So, because we knew we were going down there for 3 days, and it's not like we were going to go down and change clothes and go sightseeing and stuff like that. We were there basically for moral support and to be there to help out. But as we were walking down from our hotel where we were staying at, we go out on the street and walked, and taxi cabs would stop in the middle of the street and get out and start clapping because we had a fire department shirt on. Is that not odd?
Yeah.
It's a Wichita Fire Department shirt, and it's in bold letters on the cross the back, Wichita Fire Department. And they were stopping and just clapping and telling us, thank you guys so much for coming down. And it made us feel kind of uneasy because, we feel like we couldn't go anywhere and not get a meal for free. And we're telling them, no, we're just here to lend moral support. We want to pay for our meals. And they're going, no. We refuse to let any fireman pay for anything here. And, it was just, the reception we got was unbelievable.
That's impressive.
Getting on the subways, I remember we got on one subway to go somewhere that day, and there was a lady sitting down in the chair, and she was probably in her 60s, and the subway was fairly full, and we had got on with a group of 5 or 6 of us, and she stood up for me to sit down, and I'm like, no, I am not going to sit down in a chair and let you stand. I said, you're going to stay right where you're at. And we sat down. I sat down next to her and talked to her, and she had lost her nephew, and I believe it was like a nephew and her uncle, or a couple different people though at the tower, and she was just going back and forth. And down in the subways, there was thousands and thousands of pictures of missing persons' pictures, and they'd have a little story about them. Hasn't been seen since this day. Last seen on the 52nd floor. Has anybody seen this person? And there's pictures everywhere, all down in the subway and on the streets, and just unbelievable.
It'd be emotional for sure. Now, you guys have said that you offered moral support, but what types of things did you actually do to help?
Well, some of the guys said, what can we do? We offered to go in and start cleaning the stations. These guys haven't had a chance to do anything or perform any maintenance on some of their equipment. They were trying to retrieve their equipment. And he goes, you guys really want to help? And Todd Newland, and I believe it was Kenny Austin, a couple said, yeah. And he says, go to some of the services.
John Troyer.
John Troyer from Shelby County Fire. They went to the services, to the wakes, because there were so many. And he says, go support the families. and these guys went down to.
Well, like they said, they were burying their own crew members, and they're not even able to go there. And you know, when a firefighter dies in the line of duty, if you've ever seen how the receptions are, it's a sad time, but it's a very memorable time, because you've got a row of engines that are following the procession, and you've got all these guys in dress uniform and all the honor guard members. And even if we lose a firefighter here, we've lost them in the past. I mean, we've just lost, Urban Eck, and when we lost him, if you'd have seen his funeral, it was beautiful. Had all these guys from different counties and different other cities that came in to be part of our procession, and all the fire trucks falling in a line and going down to the funeral is just beautiful. And they're burying guys, and they're having maybe one or two firemen one from Canada and one from Louisiana is the only two firefighters at that funeral, and they didn't even know the guy, and it was sad knowing that, but you got 343 guys passed. It would take you a year to bury them all if you buried them one a day. So they were burying 3 and 4 and 5 a day.
Well, that's wonderful. You guys were able to go and offer that support.
Yes.
I noticed that you brought some things to share with us, and Chip, maybe you could talk a little bit first about that book that you were referencing earlier.
Yeah, it's just named Firehouse, and it's a story about that first station that we visited when we went there. So, and I thought how interesting. I think my mom bought it for me, actually, and there it was, Engine 40, and that's the first station we went to. And the guy in that particular station, I mean, they lost 12 people, and it talks about each individual person in the book, and one of them was a brand new rookie, had never even met the guys, gets there 8:30 in the morning, he brought some like bagels and cream cheese, put it on the counter, and then they never even had a chance to introduce himself, and he was part of the crew of the 12 guys. And it talks, experience of different ones, everywhere from 30 years to some of them with 15, 6 years, to the guy that was working there at that station the first day. Very interesting, the history of that station there in Lower Manhattan. And then the other one is Last Man Down, and I saw this guy. He was the battalion commander, and I saw him on all these shows. And so I went out and I bought his book. Well, last summer he was here, and he spoke to a group here in Wichita, and me and Todd Newland went, and he very friendly and introduced us, and of course he signed the book for us, but he talked about it, and he was the one that gave the order in the North Tower after the South Tower had collapsed, and for everyone to evacuate. And he briefly explains this is the largest rescue effort in the history of the world or in the United States that he could recall. And here he was, given that order, evacuate, wondering, did I search every floor by floor by floor, all the way down? And he had to make that tough decision. And Todd Newland, that was with me that day, said, Chief, if you had to do it again, would you do it? And he says, absolutely. Well, lo and behold, they get all the way down, and they met this lady, Josephine, who said, I can go no further. And they're like, we got to go, come on, we got to go. And the tower came down, they got caught in a void. They made it, and he was with what they call the Ladder 6, the Lucky 6 of Ladder 6. And he talks about being in there. And that's what when he came and spoke here in Wichita, he talked about those moments of darkness of being in there, and how many hours they were trapped, 8 hours till they were finally to get out, and saw this little beam of light. And and he wondering and going through all those emotions. Is this it? Am I dead? It's totally pitch black. He's sitting on a ledge. Where am I? Am I in purgatory? He's like, am I in heaven? And he goes through all that, all those emotions, and it's just incredible. But to me, how they went from floor to floor, the entire floor, and he talks about, was it 280 elevators in these buildings, but only 4 stairwells in these towers. And not only getting to read his book, but listening to him here, in Wichita here in Wichita last summer. It was just incredible, and you know, the leadership and everything that he talked about on that day, because they lost their whole command staff, was just completely wiped out. And you know, not only the 343 guys, that upper echelon, that leadership at the time, just starting over and going through all those emotions, and
It'd be devastating.
very devastating. Yes.
And what do you have, Jim?
Well, I'm a person who likes to keep scrapbooks and stuff like that of things that I've been involved in. One of the things I did is throughout that whole year, 2 years, 3 years, I mean, everything kept being printed up and more things, and you'd look online, you'd find more things, and a lot of the pictures I took down at Ground Zero, I just brought them in to just kind of reflect back on. One of the things that probably hit home the hardest was one of the things I printed off was a list of the names of firemen that had passed away that day, and there's 7 full pages of names. I mean, and you start looking at, you know, and there's just 343 people's names, and to us right now, that's all they are is names, but every one of them, you know, has a family, you know, and it's just, and kids, and we was able to, a year later after, well, first of all, while we were there in New York, there was some way the media leaked out that there was going to be a service for the firemen at what park is that at the stadium there at New York Stadium.
Yankee Stadium.
Yeah, Yankee Stadium. There was going to be a deal, and they said no, that's not going to happen. So what they were doing is they were discouraging people from trying to come to New York for this deal, and it was being set up more for people that were already in New York and people that were there for families and stuff, you know, of only. And when we first got in, the lady that I'd done all my arranging with, Diana Hayworth, she, when we got there was a kids, like a first grade, second grade groups that had written letters to us to show us their thanks for us coming to New York, and each person got a letter, and we was reading them there, and I mean, it was just, we just pulled in there at that location there in the YMCA, and everybody got these letters to read when we first got there, and the emotions just started coming as we were reading these letters, these kids saying, thank you so much for coming to help. I lost my cousin in the fire, you know, and this and that, and then she came over to me and she goes, I got something for you I think you guys may enjoy. And I said, what's that? And she goes, they're going to have a service here tomorrow night, and I got you guys all tickets to New York Stadium to be able to be part of the service. And that, I mean, floored everybody, because we had already been told that it's going to be impossible to get into that service, and we was able to be there and be part of it, and it was just
phenomenal.
Oh, it really was. I mean, they had people like
James Earl Jones was the master of ceremonies.
Yeah, and they had Oprah there, and Bette Midler, and they had the president was there. They had
Rudy Giuliani spoke. It was just incredible.
All the people that came out, and then remember they had Don King showed up in the audience, and it was during a prayer time, and he shows up with all of his entourage and his hair sticking straight up, and he's walking through waving at people as people are bowing their heads. He's waving like he's getting ready to bring in a prize fighter, and security took him and escorted him out, because
Really?
and that was the best thing to happen right then, because he came in and tried to steal the limelight of something that wasn't needed to be done. But I took pictures of all the people that had came down there, and it was like, wow. I look back at it now and go, wow, Clinton was there, and Hillary was there, and you know, Mayor Giuliani, and all the staff from the White House, and it was just really, really neat to go back and look at some of the people that were there.
Yeah, I bet that was quite an
Bette
experience.
Midler, and yeah.
She sang, and it was just, oh my gosh, it was unbelievable.
Oprah and James Earl Jones, and they just had a deal set up where they were out in the stand and out in the outfield in stands, and we were back in the stands watching them. So it was really amazing to be able to be there and be part of it.
For sure. Now tell me about this helmet. You actually painted this.
Yeah. After 9/11, we had a gentleman that had his name was Bill Spade, and he had lost his crew from Engine 5. This was kind of his little calling card he had brought with him from Rescue 5. This was a deal that he had printed up himself that he would just bring with him and hand out to people. And it's a little card telling of all of the personnel that he was lost off his crew, and the officers and members of the Rescue Company 5, and the only one that lived was Bill Spade. And it was from Rescue 5 and Engine 160. He's the only one that lived through this. He's injured enough that he will not be able to go back to full staff because he's injured his legs and stuff in the pile. But he was thrown, I think he said he was thrown 200 and some yards from the pile when it came down, and he ended up in a debris pile that he had to dig his way out of, and he tells the story about it. It's pretty amazing him talking the story and telling it. Well, when he was coming to town, I had got some information about him. They had sent a kind of an info sheet on him and what he was going to talk about and stuff. And in there, he talked about losing his helmet in the pile. And so I thought, hey, that'd be kind of cool. I could figure out what I could paint on a helmet and paint one for him. So I made one especially for him with his name on the back. I painted into it, and then painted him one with the American flag on it. Kind of an American flag and New York fire helmet kind of morphed together for him. And when I handed it to him, it just broke him down to tears, and it was really a great... He had gotten a bunch of stuff given to him when he was here in Wichita, and they're packing all this stuff up, and they said, okay, we'll send this back to you. And they grabbed the helmet, and he goes, no, I don't think so. That's going home with me. I'm not going to get a chance of losing this thing. So that made me feel really good.
Yeah.
And since then, I've painted these helmets for different things. Parents of murdered children, I painted one for them, and they done an auction and sold it for over $1,000. They did there's been other programs for children programs and other adult programs that I've donated them to, that they've raised money selling them. It's just I'm honored to be able to have the talent to do that, and then to be able to reflect back on 9/11 by doing the flag in memory of 9/11.
Yeah, it looks
That's
great.
Pretty cool. Thank you.
Anything else you guys wanted to add about your experiences before we wrap up?
Overwhelming. I know I keep saying overwhelming, but unimaginable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The pile, I tell you right now, looking at what they've done in this 10 years is amazing. I would never thought they'd have been this far. You know, and everyone, the people were saying they don't want to rebuild, they want to leave it as a... I went back a year later with Wade Hawley, one of my firefighter friends that I went back there with. We went down to the pile again, and they had removed, this was 1 year later, and they'd removed all the debris. It said it took 100,000 dump trucks to move all the debris from there to ship it out to the island for them to go through. And then they still had to sift through every little shovelful, looking for anything that would reflect DNA or anything that would reflect a personnel of a person, or anything that they could confirm a death of a person. But looking down in that hole that was left, you could see where things came through, and there was a small hole that kind of caught my attention. I'm like, wow, what is that? It looked like almost like you were looking down and it had like a gopher hole or something that come through the side, like maybe a pipe. And a lady was standing there, she says, no, that's where the subway comes through. And I'm like, wow, it's 70 feet down from ground level. It's 70 feet down, and it's just an area where the subway comes through. And from that, where I was at, you know, like you're saying, when you're looking at 16 acres of square that's dug down, it's just from over here to over there, it just looks like a small pipe, and it's a huge subway hole. So yeah, everything, the trucks that were down there, all these heavy machinery that were down in that hole that were working, looked like little Tonka toys down there, because it's the immensity. It's just huge hole there.
Yeah, I bet.
That's what stands out. The pile has it, like Jim said, the Tonka trucks, but these are gigantic cranes, and there were dozens of them working, and it's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much for being here. It really was interesting to hear your perspective, and thank you for going there on behalf of the city.
Well, thank you for having us.
All right, and thank you for watching this edition of Local Loop.